Hello everybody, my name is Robius, and welcome to a new episode of Assassin's Creed: The Real History. In this series, I compare events in a selected character's life within one of the Assassin's Creed games to the actual history the individual lived through. As always, beware of major story spoilers. For today's episode, we will be taking a look at the history of the American Army general from the Revolutionary War, Israel Putnam. As is customary, I'll begin this episode by sharing with you his pre-game history, which will inform us on his background prior to AC3, then his in-game history, which you see depicted in the game, and lastly we will analyze the differences between what happens in the game to the real historical events of the individual's life. Starting with the pre-game history, Israel was born on January 7th, 1718, in what was then called Salem Village, Massachusetts. His parents, Joseph and Elizabeth Putnam, were a successful farming family who had opposed the Salem witch trials when they had taken place from 1692 to 1693. Putnam was raised on the farm until he reached adulthood, eventually moving away in 1740 at the age of 22 to Moore Lake, in the northeast of Connecticut. Here, the land was cheaper and it was easier for him to find work. In fact, an unconfirmed story exists that claims that as a young man, Putnam killed the last wolf in Connecticut with the help of fellow farmers. Since they believed it was necessary to kill the wolves to protect their sheep, it is said Putnam crawled into its den with a rope attached to his leg and only wielding a torch and musket with which he slew the she-wolf. When the French and Indian War broke out in 1754, Putnam joined the conflict and became a member of Rogers Rangers, who were a quickly deployable light infantry force trained by Major Robert Rogers. In reason of his successes, Putnam was promoted to the rank of captain in 1756 and major in 1758, eventually leading his own company of Rangers from Connecticut. On August 8, 1758, during another military campaign, Putnam was captured by Native American forces in New York. It is said that during his imprisonment, he was not initially treated as a prisoner of war and was therefore beaten and at the mercy of his captors. They later tried to ritually burn him alive. However, this was initially interrupted by rainfall, and later the situation was diffused by a French officer. His imprisonment soon came to an end, and in 1759 he led another regiment into the Valley of Death during the attack on Fort Carillon, and even marched on Montreal with the British Army in 1760. In 1762, Putnam was involved in a shipwreck during the British expedition against Cuba, which he survived. His military career continued into 1763 during the Pontiac's Rebellion, where he participated by joining the reinforcements to relieve Pontiac's siege of Fort Detroit. Following the end of this conflict, Putnam is noted to have been one of the individuals who objected to British taxation policies early on. In 1766, following the beginning of the Stamp Act crisis, he was elected to the Connecticut General Assembly and later became one of the founders for the state's chapter of the Sons of Liberty. It is said these actions eventually led him to threaten the governor of Connecticut, Thomas Fitch, by telling him that his home would be leveled with the dust in 5 minutes if he did not give the Sons of Liberty the stamp tax papers. Just prior to the Revolution, despite his activities against the British, Putnam had made a life for himself as a successful farmer and tavern owner. On April 20th, 1775, he received news of the battles of Lexington and Concord, which had just started the war. Riding his horse for approximately 8 hours, he reached Cambridge the next day and offered himself to the Patriots' cause. In reason of his prior service, Israel Putnam was made Major General of the Army of Observation, which preceded the Continental Army, and was only second in rank to General Artemus Ward. It would be at this point in his life where he first met Major General Putnam in Assassin's Creed 3 during the Battle of Bunker Hill, where Connor came looking for him as he needed help locating John Pitcairn. Historically, Putnam played a major role both in planning the Battle of Bunker Hill and the actual fighting. It is said that it was during this confrontation where the general ordered William Prescott to tell his troops a quote which has been famously associated to his name ever since.
And above all else, men, do not fire until you see the whites of their eyes.
This order turned out to be important since the troops from New England were low on ammunition. The battle ended with the British taking the ground, but not without suffering the highest casualties they had encountered in a single battle during the war up until then. Putnam later joined the Continental Army after it was officially created in July of 1775. In this new organization, he was made the colonel of the 3rd Connecticut Regiment and later the brigadier of the Connecticut Militia. Following the Battle of Bunker Hill, Putnam commanded the American forces in New York in April of 1776, as he waited for the Commander-in-Chief, George Washington, to arrive. Unfortunately, his career began a bit of a downward spiral after the Battle of Long Island in August of 1776, where he was forced to retreat. Although Washington did not blame him for this loss, the Second Continental Congress did. Immediately, Putnam was set on recruitment duties, but later returned to military command in 1777 at the Hudson Highlands. Once again, however, he was defeated by the British forces under General Henry Clinton, who fooled his troops and managed to capture their forts. Putnam was initially brought to a court of inquiry for these failures, but he was later exonerated of any fault. In 1779, Putnam took part in another event for which he is famed. Stories claim that while he was separated from his troops in the morning at a tavern, he was warned that the British were approaching on his position. Putnam then got on his horse and narrowly evaded capture as he was chased by the British cavalry. He reached a steep hill and made a quick decision to ride down and avoid capture. Apparently, someone fired at him and the round went through his hat but did not hit him. He then reached his troops safely as the British could not capture him. Sadly, in December of 1779, Israel Putnam suffered a paralyzing stroke which ended his military career. The general eventually died on May 29, 1790 in Brooklyn, Connecticut. In summary, there were a few differences between Israel Putnam's actual life and his representation in Assassin's Creed 3. Firstly, evidently Putnam did not play a role in the death of John Pitcairn by aiding a Mohawk assassin during the Battle of Bunker Hill. Secondly, Putnam was not present at the supposed attempt on Washington's life at Connor's fictional public execution, and he did not help save the young assassin's life by vouching for him. Overall, despite his in-game representation being short, its history is rather accurate, including the American retreat during the Battle of Bunker Hill. Even though his role was minor in the game's story, his personality, actions, and charisma were wonderfully displayed in the game as his historical persona was truly brought to life. And with that final fact, we have finished another episode of Assassin's Creed: The Real History. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you did, I highly recommend you try out one of the Assassin's Creed games. Thank you all for watching. Please leave any suggestions for future characters from any of the Assassin's Creed games that you'd like me to cover in the comment section below. Please rate, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all in a future historical episode.